What did ancient humans do when they got lost? You are standing in a forest. No phone, no GPS, no road signs, no landmarks you recognize. The sun is going down. Something is moving in the bushes behind you, and you have absolutely no idea where you are. Today, this would be a mildly inconvenient camping story you tell at dinner parties. For ancient humans, this was potentially the last situation you would ever be in. So how did they deal with it? How did a species with no maps, no compass, and no Google Maps manage to navigate an entire planet? Because they did. Ancient humans crossed oceans, climbed mountain ranges, spread from Africa to the tip of South America, and found food in environments that would confuse a modern survival expert within hours. Either they were incredibly lucky, or they knew something we have completely forgotten. Let's start with what they actually had to work with. No maps. That much is obvious. The oldest known map is around 14,000 years old, carved onto a piece of stone in Spain. For most of human history before that, there was nothing. No written directions, no landmarks with labels. Just the world, exactly as it was, with zero instructions. What they did have was the sky. Before cities, before electricity, before light pollution turned the night sky into a faint gray smudge, the stars were basically a giant navigation screen, available every single night. Ancient humans could read the position of stars the way you read a street sign. The North Star doesn't move. The sun rises in the east and sets in the west, without fail. The moon follows a predictable path. Once you learned to read these patterns, you had a working compass, available every day and every clear night, for free. The sky was their GPS, and unlike your phone, it never ran out of battery. But stars only work at night, and only when it's not cloudy. So what else did they use? Animals. This sounds basic, but it is actually quite sophisticated. Birds migrate in predictable directions. Certain insects only appear near water sources. Grazing animals move toward grass and away from predators in patterns you can learn to read. Even the behavior of wind and how it bends grass or moves through trees tells you something about the landscape around you. Ancient humans were not just walking through environments. They were reading them. Every broken twig, every animal track, every shift in wind direction was information. They were essentially walking through a book they had spent their entire lives learning to read. Modern humans walk into a forest and see trees. Ancient humans walked into the same forest and saw directions. Then there is something researchers call wayfinding memory. Humans have a part of the brain called the hippocampus that is specifically built for spatial navigation. In people who rely heavily on navigation, this part of the brain is measurably larger. Studies on London taxi drivers showed their hippocampus grew bigger the more they navigated complex routes. Ancient humans who spent their entire lives moving across landscapes likely had navigation abilities that would embarrass a modern person completely. There is also the matter of rivers. This one is so simple, it's almost annoying. Rivers always flow downhill. They always lead somewhere. Follow a river and you will find lower ground, other water sources, animals, food, and eventually other humans. For ancient people, a river was not just a water source. It was a road with an arrow on it permanently pointing in a useful direction. Lost in the wilderness? Find a river. Follow it. Problems significantly reduced. But here is where it gets really interesting. Ancient humans did not just navigate alone. They passed knowledge down. Researchers studying indigenous communities that maintained traditional navigation practices found something remarkable. Children were taught to memorize landscapes from a very young age. Not just landmarks, but sequences. You go past the rock shaped like a sleeping animal, then toward the place where two rivers meet. Then follow the ridge until you see the valley opening to the south. These were essentially verbal maps passed from generation to generation with zero writing required. The Aboriginal Australians have a system called songlines. Entire navigation routes across thousands of miles of Australian landscape were encoded in songs. The song described the landscape feature by feature. You sang the song, you followed the route. You never needed to write anything down. Which means ancient humans did not just navigate. They invented a way to store navigation knowledge across generations without a single piece of paper. So what actually happened when someone got genuinely, properly lost? Probably the same thing that happens in any group when one person has no idea where they are. Someone else did know. In a group of experienced hunters and gatherers who had spent their lives in a specific landscape, being completely disoriented would have been unusual. Most people in the group carried detailed mental maps of their territory, simply from years of moving through it. Getting lost was likely much rarer than we assume. Because losing your way in a landscape you've lived in your entire life is harder than it sounds. Here's what makes all of this genuinely interesting. The navigation abilities ancient humans developed were not just impressive for their time. They were objectively extraordinary. Polynesian sailors crossed thousands of miles of open ocean with no instruments, reading wave patterns, star positions, bird behavior, and wind direction to find islands the size of a dot in an enormous ocean. They did this routinely, not as a survival emergency, as normal travel. Meanwhile, the average modern human cannot find their car in a parking lot without pressing the beep button. We did not get smarter. We outsourced our navigation to a small glass rectangle and let the skill quietly disappear. Ancient humans did not have GPS. They did not need it. They had something arguably better: a deep, practiced, lifelong relationship with the world they moved through. They read the sky, they followed rivers, they memorized landscapes. They sang their maps. They passed knowledge down through generations without a single written word. And if you dropped one of them in the middle of an unfamiliar wilderness with no tools, they would probably find their way out before you figured out that your phone had no signal.